Welcome to the phone-in show. Should people with extreme views be allowed to speak at universities? Recently, the government passed laws banning all extremist preachers from campuses. The bill says places such as schools and universities have a duty to help prevent people being drawn into terrorism. Do you think that that is the right approach? Will that drive those views underground? And what about free speech? So, do you think extremists should be allowed to come and talk to university students? After all, it's different from schools. Schools are there to teach children the difference between right and wrong, amongst other things. By the time you get to university, you're a young adult. Therefore, you should be allowed to discuss difficult and extreme views. Now, there are certain opinions, of course, that would already be covered under existing laws. But what exactly is an extremist view? You tell me. After the news with Anisa Kadri.
Got something to say? Then say it. Nihal on BBC Asian Network.
Anisa, thank you very much indeed. So, what do you think? Should people with extreme views be allowed to speak at universities, or should they be banned from speaking at universities? That's the question I've got for you this morning. What do you think? Your first question may well be, what is an extreme view? Well, the government guidelines say universities must take seriously their responsibility to exclude those promoting extremist views that support or are conducive to terrorism. So, free speech versus views that you do not like, and therefore those views should be banned from university campuses. Do you agree with that? The Home Secretary, Theresa May, certainly does. She expects universities to take a tough stand after claims that Mohammed Emwazi, the so-called jihadi John, may have been radicalised at Westminster University in London. So, by banning all extremist preachers, does that risk driving the debate further underground? After all, are you really going to be groomed in public in a meeting? Or is it more likely to happen on your tablet or on your phone or in your laptop in your bedroom? This is, after all, something that can be done online. You don't have to meet anyone to be led down a path of extremism. So what's the point? Or do you feel that, even though people who go to university are young adults, they are still impressionable? As we've seen, one of the three people who are currently on bail after visiting Syria was only 19 years old. Now, we're not aware at this point in time whether that person was a university student or not. We are certainly aware that Mohammed Emwazi did go to university. And while we may not be sure where and how he was radicalised, the university option is certainly there to explore. So, if these speakers are banned from universities, will that be a good thing? Or will that buy into the hands of the extremists themselves? Surely, in a mature democracy, we have to be able to handle lots of different views. So, tell me what you think. Should people with extreme views be allowed to speak at universities? 81869 is the text number. You can email Nihal at bbc.co.uk or give me a call. Here's the number.
Call Nihal now on 08459 440 445.
Good morning. It's coming up to 11 minutes past 10. You are, of course, listening to Nihal live on the BBC Asian Network, and a very good morning to you. The phone-in show is open for business, and I want to know, do you think that people with extreme views should be banned from university campuses? That's the question I have for you this morning, and I would be very, very interested to know what you think about this, whether you believe that there is no place for extremist views on university campuses, or whether you think, well, what about free speech? And does free speech only apply to non-Muslims? And when it comes to Muslims having their opinions, then there is an issue. And what is extremist ideology? Well, the Lib Dem climate change minister Ed Davey has tried to identify it. He said someone who espoused an Islamic caliphate, and then I'm quoting him here, and said in order to get that you'll need to kill people, would cross the line. He then went on to say, but saying some people believe in a caliphate, I don't think that's wrong. But then, of course, would you argue that you don't believe in the Arab Spring because people will die? And, of course, plenty of people died in the Arab Spring to set up the foundations of democracy in countries. Here, in this country, of course, blood was spilled in order for it to be a functioning democracy. Now, of course, we're not arguing that the caliphate is a democracy. It's, of course, completely the opposite of that. But do you think it would be extreme to say an Islamic caliphate, in order for it to be set up, some people will have to die? Some people will have to be killed in order to make sure that happens? Would you regard that as a view that is not welcome on a university campus, or would you think that, yes, it is welcome because we can challenge it? Imran Shah is a political blogger and joins me now. Good morning, Imran.
Good morning.
Do you think that extremist speakers should be banned from university campuses?
I don't. Simply because we are dealing with a situation where in university, that's the best place where you can have these views and explore these views as a student. We have to understand that if we're going to create healthy adults, we have to allow a space where these growing adults can experience these views. Because if we are not going to allow a diverse mix of views in these areas, then we're not going to create a healthy society. That's simply the case.
All right, Imran, thank you. Professor Anthony Glees joins me now, Director of the Centre for Security and Intelligence Studies at the University of Buckingham. Good morning, Professor Glees.
Good morning.
Healthy adults need a space for debate with a diverse mixture of views, says Imran Shah. Therefore, these individuals should not be banned from university campuses.
Well, I agree with what you just said, but that is not actually what Imran was saying, and it's not the answer to the question you put to him. Because the question you put to him was about whether extremists and extremists who support violence or simply extremists. This has nothing to do with a healthy society. It actually has to do with the opposite of a healthy society. A healthy society is one in which people respect each other and they respect the values of liberal democracy. Indeed, it is on that basis that the British taxpayer agrees to fund higher education, that graduates will be civilised, democratic and inclusive. These are the government's words, not mine. Civilised, democratic and inclusive, and letting people onto campuses who say that women who commit adultery should be stoned, that Jews are descended from pigs, literally, that gays are unnatural and should suffer all kinds of punishment, including death. This has nothing to do with diversity. It has absolutely nothing to do with academic freedom. It is the antithesis of academic freedom. And yes, universities should jolly well rise to the challenge of this surge of jihadist ideology that's sweeping through young British Muslim minds and tell these people to go and get lost.
Imran Shah.
What the doctor is actually saying is essentially
Professor, yeah.
that the professor, whatever.
It doesn't matter.
What he's saying essentially is that the ideology that's espousing these ideas simply isn't the reason. It's simply not the reason where students are being radicalised. We've seen time and time again the source of radicalisation is the internet. It's not campus. And what he...
Sorry, Imran, that's rather a broad statement, because you're essentially saying that everything, all radicalisation stems from the internet, and you don't have the proof to say that. It's very complex how people are radicalised. It's not just one thing, is it?
Well, no. But
Imran Anwazi may have been radicalised on campus. We just don't know.
No, but what I'm saying is that there is a continuous link that's being made between universities and campus and radicalisation, and there is simply no evidence base for this at all.
Neither is there any evidence to discount it wholly either, is there?
Well, no, I'm not saying that it's wholly on...
Well, that's what you did say.
But what I'm saying, this idea that we know the sources of radicalisation are completely false. The fact that we even think that it's from an Islamist ideology is false as well. Continuously we see the reasons why violent extremism is happening, and we see it from the mouth of those who are doing it.
Okay, yeah, but you're looking way back. But what we're thinking about is impressionable teenagers, 18, 19, for instance, who, if they are subjected to the kind of opinions that Professor Glees quoted about Jews and about homosexuals and about adulterers, then this cannot have a positive effect on them.
No, but what
deal with the specifics of what Professor Glees said.
Simply because it's not just Muslims who say this in our society. Therefore, at what level are we going to basically address the hypocrisy in which we deal with Muslims who say such things and other people?
Wait a minute. Hate speech is hate speech.
But if they are...
The laws are not... The law, as it is written, it does not say Muslims. It says people.
if we can prosecute them in the law, then prosecute them. Then why are we taking these extra steps in order to try and criminalise free speech, essentially? If someone is saying that my religious views is this, this and this, okay, fine. I may not agree with them, but he's still allowed to say it. If he's going to the extent that therefore that we must do this on other people, then that's the stage where it becomes hate speech and incitement to violence, and therefore there is already a legal precedence in order to deal with that sort of behaviour.
So Imran, do you believe? Just to be clear, you believe that a man or a woman who says the things about Jewish people that Professor Glees was quoting, some people believing, do you believe that person should be allowed to speak on a university campus?
They should be allowed to. Just because I don't agree with their views doesn't mean they shouldn't be allowed to.
Okay, all right, Professor Glees. Professor Glees, you made that clear.
I'm just absolutely flabbergasted by this. People like Imran, I'm afraid, are using the idea of academic freedom and free speech as a camouflage to make extremist political viewpoints seem normal. That's the problem.
What's extremist political viewpoints? Because people have a lot of political...
Wait. Yeah, Professor Glees, that's an important question that Imran has asked you. What do you regard as an extreme political viewpoint and non-violent? Because, of course, if it's violent, then there are laws already existing. No, but a non-violent political extremist view...
With violent, I could name you endless people who have come onto campus to preach violence.
Which would be illegal.
Name me. Hang on. You can't
name some names.
Well, that's not. There's no point in that.
I can't get my message over.
Yeah, sorry, Professor Glees. But tell me, non-violent, because of course laws are already there.
Yes, but hang on. Yeah, we have just heard from Imran that he doesn't want the laws used because he says he doesn't want people who are extremists.
That's not what he said. He said that if they cross the line, then of course they will be arrested because they've broken the law.
Hang on. I'm challenging you to name me a single extremist campus ideologue who has been notified by the university authorities and prosecuted. And you can't do it because there isn't a single one. That's the truth.
That's right. So there isn't a single one. There's not been a single preacher that hasn't been arrested for this sort of thing.
So, okay, wait a minute. Professor Glees, if the law is not being implemented, that's not the fault of universities, is it?
It is, because they have a duty. They have a duty to uphold the laws that we have in this country. There is no absolute right to free speech in this country, nor should there be, whether in a university or in anywhere else. And this has nothing to do with religion. Imran said, if it's his religious belief, etc., etc. The vast majority of British Muslims regard their religion rightly as a religion of peacefulness. They want to have nothing to do with it. Look at the parents of the girls from Bethnal Green Academy. They're distraught that their children have been radicalised and recruited to become sex slaves for the Islamic State.
But these are children you're talking about, not university students. And also, Professor Glees, two Tory peers have argued, and of course managed to get Cambridge and Oxford exempt from this because they're not, strictly speaking, student unions, saying that when Sir Oswald Mosley, leader of the British fascists, came to speak at Oxford, under this legislation, he would have been banned, and he was roundly challenged. He had extreme anti-Semitic views.
Quite right, too. We are a multi-ethnic, multi-faith society in the United Kingdom, and all the better for it. The vast majority of Muslim mums and dads do not want to have their kids radicalised, whether they're at school, or which is where these girls were, or at university. What has happened has been that these Islamic societies, under the guise of religion, under the camouflage of academic freedom, have allowed very extreme views to be kind of normalised. That is the problem. University, higher education is important. I'm a professor myself. You and I should be talking about the heading.
Wait, let me finish.
2015. It shows you how far we have sunk in this country, and that is the issue.
All right, Imran.
Okay, so first of all, I never really said that I agree in in universal free speech. The fact that I agree that there's hate laws, hate crime laws and hate speech laws to curtail that sort of thing is indicative of that. What I'm saying is that if that person is inciting violence or inciting the sort of speech that leads to discrimination, that person should be prosecuted on the already existing law, and that's quite effective. There's nothing wrong with universities if it happens to do that, to say that to report it to the police on that basis that they can be prosecuted. And the fact that we need some new raft of legislation to try and curtail this essentially work as a thought police, that you may be of suspect of being a violent terrorist of some sort because you have certain views is absurd. If I quote you, Don Horton, who is the director of the International Centre of Study of Terrorism, he simply says that, at first point, the overwhelming majority of people who hold radical beliefs do not engage in violence. And more importantly, the second is that there is an increased evidence that people who engage in terrorism do not necessarily hold radical beliefs. In other words, our complete understanding of radicalization, the particular that leads to violent extremism and terrorism, is a complete and utter fallacy. So it's absurd that we're even talking on this basis.
Right, Professor Glees, you find that funny?
Well, I think the idea that terrorists don't hold radical views, I don't know who Professor Horton is, but that is such obvious nonsense. I think your listeners...
Well, we don't have an evidence base for this. All we have is rhetoric.
Well, of course, by definition, carrying out extreme acts would see that the source of it would be extremist views, Imran. I mean, that's fairly obvious, isn't it? It's self-explanatory.
But what we have... I'll give you another example.
Answer the question, Imran. Don't answer the question with another statement.
I am answering the question. If you let me speak,
Imran, go on.
So if you give you another example, and we've seen this time and time again, in America, a U.S. soldier who saw atrocities being made by other U.S. soldiers complained to the U.S. police and was saw that these atrocities were pushed under the carpet. He's outraged first that this inhumanity came, and then he looked at religious ideologues that may be present elsewhere in the world to try and justify the terrorism that he made later on.
Don't universities, Imran, have a duty of care to make sure that the people within their walls, while they're there studying, are not radicalised?
Yeah, but again, it's about, well, what's the evidence case for this? There isn't any evidence, and therefore...
Well, wait a minute. Look, there's... But don't the security services and the government have to veer on the side of caution? That's what Grant Shapps, the Conservative chairman, has said, that they have to. They have to draw a line. But he said, what we're saying is that if we believe somebody comes into university and they preach extreme hate, if they preach that, students should effectively be radicalised, then it's going too far. If a speaker comes on and says that they should be radicalised, that they shouldn't regard living in the West as something that is important, that Western people are not worthy, non-Muslims are not worthy of life. If they were to make comments like this, can you see how an impressionable mind may take that as justification for committing acts of terror? Can you see the link between those things, Imran?
I can see the possible link of dehumanising people, and that leads to the killing spree of those types of people.
Right, okay. So if those people are saying those things on campus, and you yourself are admitting that you can see the link in that, then shouldn't those people be banned?
No, but the point is that we don't have an evidence base. Me saying this is not an evidence. Me saying this is just this is like Joe Blogg saying that I can see maybe that this person.
So, but you would agree. You would okay. But you wait a minute. You yourself have admitted that radicalisation takes place online, haven't you?
Sorry, say that again.
You believe that radicalisation takes place online, don't you?
For the most part, yeah.
Right. Okay. And of those people that are radicalising. How many of them do you think are YouTube videos where they are saying this is what you should do, this is who you are, this is what you should attack?
Sure, but the core, when we look at radicalisation...
So would you want someone like that on a university campus?
No, but what I'm saying is that whether I like their views is not concerned. But when you look at radicalisation itself, the main core root of the issue is that whether they see certain genuine grievances, whether it's home or abroad, that is underpinned for Muslims Islamophobia, whether those grievances can be seen to be addressed by the current system. Can they bring change peacefully through a democratic system? And consistently, when you see the likes of Mozambique, Muslim activists being persecuted and whatnot, when you see increasing Islamophobic laws and whatnot, then you will always get to see youth that will perceive that the establishment is no way going to address their genuine concerns and their genuine grievances.
So in order to counter that, you want to allow extremist preachers to come on, or speakers to come on to campuses?
No, what I'm saying is a broader point, is that...
Well, I don't want a broader point. I want you to focus on this very idea of extremist speakers. You can get as broad, and you can bring foreign policy, as you've alluded to, into this debate. But ultimately, it is about sources of radicalising young British Muslims.
If we're talking about sources of radicalisation, we're talking about the genuine concerns of marginalisation from the establishment. That's what we're talking about.
So how does it help? Wait a minute. How does it help counter that by having extremist speakers on campus? How does it help counter that?
The point is that...
No, answer that question.
How do I counter?
How does it aid countering of this marginalisation, this disenfranchisement? How does it aid that by allowing people with extremist views to speak to these young people? How does it aid that?
But that's a red herring. Let me explain why. If you're able to demonstrate that peaceful change to get what you want is the best way to go, then people simply won't listen.
But how are you demonstrating that by allowing extreme speakers to come to universities?
The principle of free speech, essentially, that you are allowed to say, as long as you're not inciting to violence, and so long as you're not demonising the set.
But wait a minute. But Imran, okay. Do you believe that someone becomes a radical, becomes an extremist because someone tells them to take up arms, or do you believe that there is a process that goes on beforehand which colours the mind into thinking, and indeed creating an atmosphere whereby they can become extreme? Do you believe that it is a gradual process of evolution, or they go from being a normal British Muslim to being a violent terrorist?
Consistently, it's due to some reaction to injustice, whether it's perceived or actual. And we've seen with the stories that have come out when we see actual violent terrorism, that they consistently quote the same thing. And you also notice that these people are actually not religious. They don't.
So there is an evolution of thought, is there?
Yeah, but
right. Okay. Well, that's the point about banning extremist speakers, isn't it?
Starts with no, because the root of the issue is not. Look, man, if you're going to deal with a situation where you're going to marginalise youth, then those youth are always going to be susceptible to crackpots. It's always the case. Right. People.
Okay, no, wait there. Let's bring Professor Gleeson back in on this. Professor Gleeson, marginalised young people, and if you ban these speakers, I think this is what Imran's arguing, if you ban these speakers, you're marginalising them even more, rather than allowing these conversations to take place in public.
Well, first of all, it's not about marginalisation. The whole point about this debate about universities, the people who go to universities are very privileged. 40% of our young people go to higher or further education. These aren't people who are marginalised. These are people who are being brought into the mainstream. Mohammed Imwazi was a graduate in computer programming from Westminster University. We know that 11% of the population are 18 to 28-year-olds. They commit 30% of the terrorist offences. Of those, some 55% are students of higher or further education or graduates. So it's blindingly obvious that something is happening on campus. Yes, there are other people who are extremists, I know that, but there is a stream of people who are being radicalised. They're not being marginalised. Got nothing to do with that. Quite the reverse. And it is that process that we have to turn round. And it's got absolutely nothing to do with, injustice and so on. We believe in our country in free speech. If Imran wants to say he despises the Israeli foreign minister for saying that Arabs should be beheaded if they're disloyal to Israel, I would agree with him 100%. That's got absolutely nothing to do with what we're talking about. We're talking about picking out individuals and saying it is right to kill them, including Muslims who have lost their faith. It's right to kill them. These are the messages on campus. And It is time to blow the whistle on this for once and all.
But you're arguing, Professor Gleeson, that marginalisation is not an issue here, as if you're assuming that everyone who goes to university comes from a nice, comfortable, middle-class background. That is not the case, of course, because governments have strove to make sure that people from varying different backgrounds and socio-economic ones get to university. So there is a risk of marginalisation, and people who are marginalised feeling as though their views do not matter.
That is absolutely not the case. You go to university in order to boost your life chances, to learn things that you can use, like computer programming.
Well, not all vocational degrees.
People can come from a poor background and go to bad schools, get a brilliant education in some of Britain's universities, get a brilliant education and go on to be head of the BBC or what have you. Higher education, further education, improves people's life chances. There's so many things in life.
But share ideas, Professor Gleeson. Have ideas challenged, no matter how extreme.
No, not where we're not dealing with Britain 100 years ago, when everybody was, class-ridden society and there was no social movement.
Come on, look at the statistics on social mobility, Professor Gleeson. Come on.
We live in a multi-ethnic society, and there are some things that people should no longer say or think.
So can I ask you then? So you would agree then with Ed Davey, the Lib Dem minister, that someone who said that yes, an Islamic caliphate needs to happen, and in order to get that, you need to kill people, you would not wish that view to be espoused on a university campus?
Well, Ed Davey is all over the place on this, as are the Liberal Democrats.
Well, I think every politician seems to be all over the place.
I have to say, David Cameron has been very, very clear about this. Yes, you have people like Eliza Manningham Buller of MI5,
yes.
former of MI5. I accept that. I think she's made a terrible mistake. She should keep her mouth shut on this issue. She's not a university professor, and she doesn't understand it. But it is not acceptable that people should traipse around campuses calling on others to commit acts of violence in the name of religion. It has nothing to do with religion, and we live in a culture, and a multi-ethnic culture, where people should not be able to say the first thing that comes into their head because they think it's clever. Otherwise, our country will fall apart at the seams even more than it appears to be doing at the moment. So these are, universities are citadels of the highest ideals and values, the fundamental values of living in a democracy. If people don't want to live in this country,
Professor Gleeson,
they go find a country where they can live in.
So why is it that a Muslim who says, look, an Islamic caliphate is something that we should aspire to, and in order to get that, people are going to get killed, and we may have to kill people in order to do that. When, of course, the reality is of an invasion of Iraq or an invasion of Afghanistan, people will have to be killed. The Arab Spring, people will have to be killed in order to get democracy there. But why is it a Muslim can't say that, but a Democrat could say, actually, yes, the Arab Spring, people will have to be killed in order for democracy to take root in that part of the world?
Well, I simply don't know what you're talking about. I don't think people do say people.
They don't. But it's a given that if you're going to invade another country, people are going to get killed, and you're going to drop bombs on them.
But as a country, you could argue for it or against it, but as a country, we don't intervene. We let President Putin walk into Crimea.
No, we intervene when it suits us.
So, but it's got nothing to do with Muslims. The idea that Muslims are different here, that is complete and utter nonsense.
But it isn't.
If you had the Israeli foreign minister wanting to go onto a British campus, urging that people be beheaded, I would say ban him. Oswald Mosley, dead thankfully, I would say ban him. Because we have become a different country, and we cannot allow ourselves to play silly parlour games with people's lives as if we're just talking about the difference between what's a Liberal Democrat and what's a Tory.
This is freedom of speech.
This isn't about debating society. This is about very, very hard men going in there, turning the minds of young people, ruining families, and ending up with people.
But a very hard woman, as you quoted, and you say she's wrong, former head of MI5 Lady Manningham Buller. She said she warned the Home Secretary that banning non-violent extremist views from campuses will clash with the duty of universities to protect free speech. She said, I'm afraid it is a profound irony that we are seeking to protect our values against this pernicious ideology by trying to bar views that are described too vaguely as non-violent extremism.
Yes, but look at her job at the moment. She's no longer Director General of MI5. She's head of Imperial College in London. That's the problem. These people,
she would know about academic discourse.
They go on and take up other jobs, and then they become spokespersons for other institutions. Yeah, she proves my point. Universities do not want to stick by the law, and
they do. They are just not implementing it. That's different to saying they don't want to implement it.
They don't want to implement it because they're afraid of their Islamic student societies. That's the truth. So
it is about Muslims then?
Sorry?
You were saying it's nothing to do with Muslims, but now you've just said it is about Muslims.
Well,
because now they're kowtowing to Muslims, in your opinion.
Excuse me. I said universities wrongly. They are behaving wrongly in fearing a backlash. In my long experience as an academic, whatever colour you are, you come to university, you want to be a good student. Your colour, your ethnicity, your religion has got nothing to do with it. And university leaders are completely out of touch. So I say, Muslim mums and dads don't want their children to go to university.
But as an academic, Professor Cleese, surely you would agree that our values are only as good as how robustly we can defend them in the face of extremism. Therefore, if we cannot have these discussions openly amongst young adults who want to inquire about the world and want to have their views challenged so that they can see how robust they are, then you're taking that right away from them by banning these speakers.
No, not at all. It's absolutely right that academics who are trained teachers should engage with their students. Why have, to the best of my knowledge, no jihadis come from either Oxford or Cambridge, or indeed my own university, the University of Buckingham? It is because we value tutorial care of our students. There's nothing you should not be able to discuss with your student, whether it's politics, religion, sexuality, all these things.
Well, why not be there when the speaker is there to challenge them then?
But we're talking about a platform for violent political revolutionaries who are using free speech and academic...
But if they're violent, there are laws that already cover it. This is non-extreme... Now they're trying to ban non-violent extremist speech. That's what they're trying to ban, but they can't even define that, what that means. What are the parameters of that?
Well, I just say two things. First of all, universities aren't doing it. That is the problem. How many more Mwazis do we want to create in this country? They're not doing it. You say to me, what's the difference between violent extremism and non-violent extremism? I say, at the end of the day, you've got to let a British jury, an English jury, and an English court of law decide that, because it's a complicated question, and that's how we do things.
What proof do we have that Mwazi visited a visiting speaker and listened to his or her extremist views? What proof do we have that actually happened?
Well, we have the proof that he was a member of the University of Westminster Islamic Society. So
right. So is that a crime all of a sudden?
We do know that it has been a virulent Islamic society over many years and had
Define
many
virulent.
People. Sorry?
Define virulent. What do you mean?
virulent with people like homouality and many other people who have openly called on Muslims, there's exceptionalism for you, on Muslims to go and kill in the name of
which would, of course, be against the law
that he espouses. So we do have this evidence. Now, I don't know whether Mwazi was a jihadist before he went to the University of Westminster. And of course, I accept that. But universities have a unique place in our society to uphold cultural norms. And universities have been doing nothing to prevent people like Mohammed Mwazi from turning to violence. These people aren't born... I mean, the vast majority of jihadists aren't born that way. They are turned that way. And universities should be at the forefront of preventing this. Instead, they're afraid...
Not at challenging it.
I'm sorry?
They should be at the forefront of preventing it, not challenging these views by having someone such as yourself up against someone with extreme views at a university debate.
I would always debate properly, but I would not confuse academic debate with the sort of thing that goes on in Islamic societies, where you have a speaker who comes to use that as a platform to make a political revolutionary statement.
There you go again, with sweeping generalisations of university Islamic societies, as if they're all up to no good.
Well, they're not all up to no good, but a large number of them are up to no good.
Based on what research? Tell me as a percentage of university Islamic societies are up to no good, in your opinion, based on research.
Well, based on the research that we have, which has been very extensive over the past 10 years, on the whole, those universities that are clustered around big cities, Oxford and so forth, are likely to have the most extreme...
Sorry, how many? Give me a number.
135 British universities. And
how many of their Islamic societies are up to no good, as I'm quoting you?
Any Islamic society that invites somebody onto campus to...
So you don't know?
Well, excuse me, I do know.
You don't know? Give me a number then. How many Islamic societies, university Islamic societies, are there in the UK, Professor Cleese?
I should think, as I said, there are probably about 135.
Right, and of those, how many of them do you think are up to no good?
The answer is that every Islamic society that invites an extremist...
And how many have done of those 135?
Well, I'm a qualitative political scientist, not a quantitative one. But if you want to have a look...
But you seem more than happy to say most, or to say a lot of them. But you don't have a number.
Well, I don't have a number because it's got nothing to do with quantifying. It has got to do with the quality of the speaks that are...
But you seem to be able you seem to feel confident to make generalisations about Islamic societies, and yet you have no idea how many of them are actually inviting people with extreme views to speak to them.
That is not true that I have no idea.
Well, tell me then, of the 135, which is a guess on your part.
That is not true. I read the reports that are produced, for example, by the Henry Jackson Society, my own report, which is now 10 years old and therefore out of date, but the Henry Jackson Society, a steady stream of reports, the Association of Ex-Muslims, a steady stream of reports, the newspapers, a steady stream of reports. Now, if you don't read those, I'm sorry about that. But
well, if you don't know the exact numbers, then I'm sorry about that. But there you go. We'll have to agree to apologise to each other on that.
You can have a silly argument with me about numbers.
Well, no, it's just that I'm sure that people who attend Islamic societies and do so for the spiritual well-being are greatly unnerved by your comments about Islamic societies and would argue that you seem to have some kind of idea in your head, which you can't back up with figures, about the actual extent to which Islamic societies at universities are inviting extremist speakers.
Well, I can back it up. You're asking me, if you want me to go away and write an academic paper and come up with
that would probably be good, yes.
We're having a conversation, a live conversation, and you're asking me to put precise figures on the number of extremists invited to Islamic...
No, the amount of Islamic societies who are inviting extremist speakers, that's what I'm asking you to give me a number.
There is widespread evidence that, as I say, there are 135 universities, not counting colleges of further education.
So you don't actually know the exact number of Islamic societies? You know the amount of universities, but you don't know even the amount of Islamic societies.
What is the exact... Just explain to me. I'm a stupid man. Just explain to me, what has the exact number got to do with it?
Well, because I'd like to know the extent to this problem in Islamic societies, because you seem to have a view on Islamic societies in universities, and yet you don't seem to have done any kind of in-depth research as to the amount of Islamic societies at universities across the UK, the amount of extremist speakers or people who are said to have extremist views that speak at the Islamic societies in the UK. I would think that would be the fundamentals that you would need to have in your canon before you start espousing about how extreme university Islamic societies are.
You're not listening to what I'm saying.
I'm listening to every word.
There are many reports by reputable research organisations. There are 135 or so universities in the British Isles. It would be impossible for any single person at any one point to say how many extremists go to each and every society. What you're asking of me is an attempt to undermine the core argument, and the core argument is that there are far too many student Islamic societies inviting extremists onto campus. But
you have no idea of how many? Well, even one, I guess you would argue, is too many, but it'd be interesting to know the scale of the problem, that was all. But Professor Glees, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Yogesh from Aylesbury said, in civilised world, love is the food for progress, while in uncivilised world, hate used to be promoted as food for progress, where strong used to destroy weak for progress. I hope this makes sense in saying that hate should not even be discussed in a civilised world by any faith for everyone's unity. I'm a university student and can certainly tell you university students are impressionable. Put a Muslim speaker, even if they are extremists, Muslims will want to listen. What benefit are universities or societies getting by letting these speakers talk? The idea that this creates stronger individuals is nonsense, and some Muslims will use this as a reason to mask deeper intentions. Why don't we just then let out all the criminals locked up back into society and let ordinary people deal with them and become stronger people? Nonsense. These speakers are bringing danger to our society and need to be blocked out. You don't see extremist speakers from other religions coming and speaking on campus. Note that I say extremist, and if they were, I'm sure Muslims would have something to say against this, and rightly so. The bottom line is many Muslims will protect the idea of extremist views being exposed at university, as they are better than non-Muslim views to them. Parents, students are paying a lot of money to go to university and deserve the security from these kinds of people. Hi Nihal, is this professor a Muslim? What right does he think he has to decide what teaching is Islamic? Rue from South London said, hi Nihal, it could be argued that if we were to stop those with radical views on university campuses, we're helping them to show how they are the victims. Perhaps universities should empower and educate their own peers to deal with them in a non-violent way. As society, that's what they will be doing. Simon on Facebook said, anybody who preaches hate against us and lives here does not belong here. Take your warped and evil messages elsewhere. Manmohanjit on Facebook said, why have the powers that be decided to exempt Oxbridge from this ban on extreme preachers? It implies only those attending Oxbridge are of high enough intellect to not be sucked in by a hate preacher. Surely if a rule can be justified for other unis, then why not Oxbridge or vice versa? Well, apparently there is a loophole whereby the debating societies of those two august institutions do not come under the jurisdiction of student unions. That's pretty much it. Balbinda said, people with extremist views will find it very difficult to survive in our modern world. These people will become extinct like the dodo bird. We cannot afford an extremist society. Respect and understanding, integration, regardless of origins, leads to a happier community. 81869 is the text number. Email nihal@bbc.co.uk or give us a call 08459 440 445. Wow, it's been a lively hour, that's for certain. Do you think these individuals should be banned?
Well, the important thing actually is that when you challenge somebody who has extreme views, they can't back their views up with hard facts. And under that, I think the professor would qualify as an extremist. The professor would most definitely, or should most definitely, not be able to espouse some of the generalities that is going on about without having any specific research and fact. Should ban him is another question. The fact that we, as an open society, we should be able to debate, we should be able to question, and we should be able to debunk some of the reports, some of the facts that people like, and some of the extremists is a fundamental principle of an open society. And I cannot believe that those who seem to be, or attempting to tell us that they are the champions of an open, free speech society, are the ones who are attempting to ban this. Now, yes.
But Mohammed, freedom of speech, okay, as long as it does not tear at the fabric of the foundations that keep our society peaceful, is of course acceptable. But there are not free speech to the cost of people's... good grief, I can't even speak. I've had such a tear up with Professor Glees. I think I've run out of words. What I'm saying is essentially is that, look, you've got to preserve the communal activities that we engage in whereby we get on with each other. And in order to protect that, we cannot allow people to say whatever they want to say, because it could harm that.
The sanctity of our society is individual right to have a say. And those who say things that are wrong, there has to be a process, a due process under law to challenge those people. If anybody says anything around hatred or killing people or espousing violence, then those people should be executed. If it is around ideals and fundamental principles of how a society should be constructed and differences in our opinions, then if we restrict those opinions, then we are fundamentally a tyrant, fundamentally a restrictive society. But it seems that it only applies to Muslims. The professor, although a brief point said that if the Israeli politician who espoused the beheading of Palestinians, he would want to ban it. But there are loads of Israeli Zionist speakers who come and speak at universities who are actively engaged in the process of occupation. Yet we do not ban those. We are not even talking about the banning of those. There are people who actively talk about Muslims who are bad and create division around that. But we challenge and we respect their fundamental right to speak. But it is only against Muslim speakers. And yes, there are some, I admit, who espouse violence, and those should be banned. But if it is just a challenge on somebody's right to speak and somebody's right to hear somebody speak, we should not be that restrictive. We should not leave our fundamental principles. I think right now we're the ones who are championing freedom of expression and freedom of speech, and the so-called champions are who are going down the road of a police state.
Okay, Mohammed Ayub, thank you. Ravi Ladva is a Hindu blogger. Ravi, very good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Nihal. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you. Sorry to have kept you waiting for so long.
Not at all. Not at all.
Ravi, I mean, you went to university, didn't you?
Indeed, I did.
Do you think that a university is a place where people with extreme views should be allowed to air them?
It depends on what the extreme view is. Because a lot of what we're talking about is protected by the law. Inciting violence, inciting hatred, it's protected by the law, and therefore the law should be enforced. Otherwise, it defeats the purpose of having the law. Now, the argument that we've been having is about a non-extremist or non-violent extremist views. Now, that can cover a range of subjects. For example, animal rights. A lot of people feel passionately about protecting the rights of animals, non-violently, but they are considered extreme views. However, and the irony of all of this is that in 1860, a debate took place in Oxford between Thomas Huxley and Samuel Wilberforce, which led to the wider acceptance and spreading of evolution. Something that we take for granted, that as well, okay, we just accept it as fact, but that was considered an extremist view at one stage in our past. Now, there are parts of human history, our history, whether it's Buddhist, Hindu, Sikh, Jain, Muslim, Christian, which are not pretty and are unfortunately drenched in blood. Now, that's happened in the past. We can't escape that. And if you were to talk about that, are you considered an extremist, or you could talk it from a historical point? But these are the conversations that we need to be having. A university cannot be held responsible for the emotional intelligence of an individual. For example, if a preacher who is invited to speech has an extreme view, and there are, individuals outside of the university who cannot accept, that a person has these views or is unfortunately, upsetting other people, well, debate them. Have your countervailing point, present it. You can't just rattle out the pram saying, "Oh, I don't like it, therefore it shouldn't be heard of." That is unfair, and it goes against what universities are for.
All right, Ravi, we've run out of time, unfortunately, but great to hear your views as ever.
The sound of Asian Britain on digital TV, online and...
Wasn't that fascinating, eh? 40% of Sikhs still undecided as to who they're going to vote. All right, let's turn back now to the first hour, where we were talking about universities and whether people with extremist views should be allowed to speak at universities. Anil in Pinner called in. Good afternoon, Anil.
Hi there.
What do you think?
Everyone should be allowed to express his point of view. That goes without saying. But having said that, one has to understand what the professor was trying to say. But when people come in and promote extremist ideas to a receptive audience, there is going to be chaos. And the university is not fulfilling its function if it is doing that. Now, the whole debate this morning seemed surreal to me because effectively what happened was you were asking him how many universities were there which were doing the extremist.
Yes, I wanted to gauge the scale of the problem because he insinuated that it was a big problem, but of course you can't just insinuate it. You have to be able to back it up.
It is a problem. But with great respect, Nihal, it is a very big problem or a very small problem, but it is a problem. Look, it's like that program on BBC TV, Keeping Up Appearances or something. As a professor, he can hardly knock the Muslims. As a Muslim in this country, whether he believes it or not, he's hardly going to say that I love democracy above my religion.
But he was more than happy to undermine Islamic societies by insinuating that there is a problem with extremist speakers at Islamic universities. Now, even with so-called Jihadi John, he may or may not have been radicalised. We just don't know. But in order for us to have a mature debate, what we can't start doing, surely, Anil, is making all Islamic societies feel like they are, they're hiding these Islamic extremist preachers in their midst, or they're all out to radicalise our young people. That would be unfair, wouldn't it?
Could I make a very small point? You take the word radicalise to mean revolutionize, turn around, and you take radicalize, it also means root. To radicalize someone is to send somebody back to the roots. Now, I'm 75. I could tell you all kinds of fairy stories. I come from India, which has been split. Historically, over 1,500 years, it wasn't split. Yet the only reason it was split was on religious grounds. 20 or 30 years down that line, that same country was split again on religious grounds, plus whatever. The point I'm trying to make is I can say all kinds of things, but there is a reality and there is a perception. And when programs like yours come through, we are trying to label the perception, like, Alice in Wonderland. The point is that there is basically a very intolerant group brought up by an intolerant parenting and religious tradition, which is then fed upon by outsiders, online or whatever. Now, none of us is knowledgeable enough to say where exactly the radicalism and the sense of revolutionism is coming from. We can't say. But that doesn't mean that the professor can't say that there is an issue to be dealt with, and it has to be dealt with by the Muslim communities and by asking for the democratic ways of presenting this problem.
But the point Imran Shah made, the blogger, was that you can't just ask the Muslim communities to look at this. You have to look at the fact that some of the drivers of this radicalisation may actually be external to the Muslim community. Foreign policy, marginalisation, both economic and social, Islamophobia generated by the media. These external elements also have to be taken into account.
They all have to be taken into account, Nihal. I agree with you and the gentleman. But having said that, who is going to build the cat? Who is going to address the problem? Not the professor, not you, not me. It's the Muslim community, because it is on the firing line. And if it does not address the problem of its own extremism, and to turn around and say that there is no extremism, but there are other kinds of extremism, is not an answer. Sorry.
But I guess, Anil, that even the government itself can't define what non-violent extremism necessarily sounds like. It is given no guidance, to the best of our knowledge, and I've read the news reports around this, to universities on what to do with these speakers.
There is no non-violent extremism. If somebody asks for freedom but does not threaten violence, does not suggest vigilantism, does not say that one group is more right than another group, but is asking for its own freedom, is fine. The point is that there is this particular group of people that are asking for a special dispensation on every and which ground. Now, we are an Asian community.
But can't we challenge?
Sorry.
Anil Ji, you're 75 years old, Anil Ji. You are more than clever enough to challenge extremist views. Now, if we cannot have very open debates with views that we may find repugnant on university campuses, where can we? After all, universities are places of learning. They are places of discourse. They are places where we can challenge our own values by how robustly we are able to defend them.
But the vast run of people at these universities are between 17 and 22.
Yes, they're young adults.
They are in their formative years. They have been brought up in a particular mindset. They've come there. Unfortunately, we wouldn't have this problem unless the universities had in some way contributed to the spread of extremism. Just as society has... Sorry. I'm trying to suggest is, I'm just an individual and well past it.
No, you're not in the slightest, Anil Ji. You're not. But when I was doing my A-levels, Anil, I remember an argument that took place between a student who went on to Cambridge and my history lecturer, about the IRA. And the student in question was very pro-Irish republicanism. Now, in this day and age, would he not be allowed to say that he was pro-IRA, that he could be shopped to MI5, that he would not be allowed to speak at a college or a university? Now, we were 16, 17 at the time, and we were discussing these issues.
Right. I began by saying that everybody must be allowed a right to free expression. But we still have to exercise some self-control, some vigilance. Now the question is, people like Mr. Vaz can say, exercise vigilance, but how much vigilance can you exercise? And what kind of vigilance can you exercise? You are a newspaper man. You're a journalist at the center of things. As I said, I'm on the fringe, and well on the fringe. The question is, how do you address the problem? Because what the Muslims are saying is that there is nothing wrong with whatever we are doing. It's all political philosophy. It's all, it's all the actions of the Foreign Office. I'm sorry, it isn't that.
All right.
Part of India. They were a part of India for 1,000 years. They are no longer a part of India, and we've got atom bombs pointed at each other. Now, you've got to ask yourself this question, that 50 years or 100 years down the line, is this going to be the case in the United Kingdom?
All right, Anil Ji, we're gonna have to leave it there, but Anil Ji, thank you. As always, great to speak to you. Hussein is in Birmingham. After that, Rab is in Birmingham. Hussein, good morning. Good afternoon, even. Sorry.
Nihal.
Walaikum assalam.
I've got to come on, mate. That debate I was listening to as a Muslim was suffocating, and I'll have to come on and get some breath with you and say a few things, if I may.
Of course, go.
Okay, as Muslims, we are a vibrant and diverse community, but our interests are not being properly promoted, represented and advocated. Now, what this debate today was about, the question is letting preachers not just say give speeches in universities, but let's say they can go to mosques and have speeches in temples, which is what I want, and even say synagogues and places like that, where we have people from other faiths as well as not just Muslims. But we need to understand that this is going to cause further marginalisation, and it's going to be done by basically excluding those people that we now regard as moderate speakers, and the radical speakers are fine to be excluded.
So, what's your definition then? Because of course, this is something.
This is the interesting question,
yes.
Ben, because years ago, Nelson Mandela would have been regarded as an extremist.
Well, Margaret Thatcher regarded him as one. Yes,
absolutely. And then now, if we look at him, everybody regards him as being an honourable member of society. And he was allowed to give his address to both houses of Parliament, and everybody is acclaiming him now, whereas previously he was vilified. So,
are you suggesting that in 30 years' time, Bin Laden will be seen as some kind of saviour of humanity?
Oh, what an interesting question you gave. But the answer to that is I'm not referring to Bin Laden, but who I am referring to, and this government, and as Muslims regard as someone who is moderate, is Zakir Naik. Zakir Naik has been banned from giving speeches in this country, which has only, I feel, as a Muslim, contributed to more radical speakers influencing our generation. Now, going to Zakir Naik, let me give you examples of what people...
Theresa May stopped him coming into the country, is that right?
Let me give his recent advice to Muslims regarding the cartoons that depicted the Prophet. He said, as Muslims, this is what you should do, right? If you want to protest economically by boycotting the products of that country you're offended by. Politically, go and demonstrate and protest to your politicians. And if you can, legally represent yourself and go judicially to protest and represent your interests. That's what we should be doing as Muslims. And if anybody...
This is the same Dr. Naik who believes 9/11 was an inside job, isn't it?
Well, I'm telling you what he said regarding the depiction of the cartoons that I have heard. Other things that you might say, I don't know about. I have been to his conference once at the NEC, and he didn't say anything about extremism.
He refused to regard Osama bin Laden as a terrorist, didn't he?
Can I finish the point I've started?
Well, you brought up Zakir Naik. I'm just coming back at you.
Yeah, what I'm saying is his extremism point at the talk was that as Muslims we are meant to be extremely compassionate and we're meant to be extremely humanitarian.
Yet refused to acknowledge that bin Laden was a terrorist.
Well, I think that somebody should go out there and have a more comprehensive debate with him and find out about him. And you should get him on your show to answer your questions.
I would if he was allowed in the country.
But he's broadcasting, so I'm sure he would have a telephone.
Maybe we can get a phone conversation with Dr. Zakir.
Well, what I have to say, and I'm saying this to the government and whoever's going to be elected next, Muslims regard Zakir Naik as a moderate preacher. And
but that's the problem, isn't it?
By banning him, that you are not you're silencing those moderate Muslims.
But if you regard someone who refuses to acknowledge that bin Laden was a terrorist, this is the same Osama bin Laden who justified the killing of 3,000 civilians on 9/11 because he said that as taxpayers, American taxpayers, they were contributing towards the death of Muslims, therefore it was fully justifiable to kill them. Now, you're saying that that's a moderate Muslim view, that bin Laden was not a terrorist?
Nihal, I'm saying I didn't hear him say that. And I've got to base my judgment about him on that. And he broadcasts 24/7 around the clock on television. I've never heard him say that.
It's been widely quoted that he refused to acknowledge that bin Laden was a terrorist.
I personally...
That was one of the pillars by which he was stopped from coming into this country.
I personally think he'll be up to the challenge to answer that question himself.
Yeah, he's a very eloquent man.
Yeah. And
but anyway, look, we're getting away from it. So you think? Wait a minute, Hussein.
He's the only preacher that you can understand.
Right, let's not make this about Zakir Naik. Let's just make this about extremist preachers in universities, or I shouldn't say preachers, I should say speakers at university. What do they add to the debate? What do they say to moderate Muslims, do you think, that will make them more moderate?
Well, they should be disgusted by them if they're allowed to come, and they should be challenged. But
with 18-year-olds, can we take that chance? Can we take that chance with impressionable young people that they could actually go the other way?
Well, I'm saying, who's to say they should permit them? They can be humiliated wherever they are. And, basically, intolerance is going to generate intolerance, and what Muslims and non-Muslims need to do. It needs to be a collective decision to decide what is a person who is an extremist. You see, this definition, I'll be honest with you, I've been listening to your show and you can see the debate evolving over the years, and Muslims have been targeted. They've been basically, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy now that they've basically been targeted as being called terrorists, and they're being marginalised. So that is a narrative at the moment, and I want people to, maybe people don't want me to hear me saying that, but that is how it is out there. Muslims going out there, they feel that all eyes are on us. And me as a Muslim myself, when I'm out with my family, I feel vulnerable. Not only am I going to be, because I'm in this country, going to be a target of a terrorist attack, but then I'm going to be accused and arrested and prosecuted for it. So, we get it from both, basically,
both sides. I think personally that is a view that more newspapers should report upon, actually, that this is where Muslims are caught between a rock and a hard place. But Hussein, thank you for pointing that out to us on national radio here in the BBC Asia Network. Lastly, let's speak to Rab in Birmingham. Rab, good afternoon.
Hello there, good afternoon, and can I also say, a big hello to my friend Nadim who just called in, because I haven't spoken to him for ages either.
Right, okay, well, great. Now that we've got this kind of Facebook element out of the show, of you guys gathering and hanging out, let's get back to the point that we're supposed to be talking about, which is university lecturers. Did your kids go to university, Rab?
Yes, they do, yeah.
How happy would you have been if they'd come home and said, oh, yeah, this fella turned up today saying that all Jews are descended from pigs and that gay homosexuals should die, and that...
I would have absolutely no problem with challenging my children and actually educating them, because they need to hear... they need to see that there is, two different types of teaching, and that the one is, the proper correct one, and the one isn't. Now, the thing is, if you stop this kind of thing happening where people are allowed to come in and, actually express their opinions, first of all, you're going to actually drive it underground, which means then my kids won't come home and tell me that so-and-so has been down and he said this, and then I can educate them. And the second thing is once they see that this doesn't happen, and this government does allow people like the EDL to do marches, people like the BNP to come in and do talks, and other organisations to get away with what they absolutely want to do and say that they have freedom of expression, they're allowed to actually write things in papers, actually draw pictures of our prophet, etc., and then they can use the label that they have the freedom of expression. To me, that is also inciting hatred. Now, to somebody who's not of my faith, he won't see it as this is why it's only a cartoon. If I was to draw a cartoon of somebody's mother and draw it in a funny way, they would be offended, but I wouldn't. Why should I be offended about somebody else's mother? But yet that person would be offended whose actual mother it was. So when this government tells us that we should be more tolerant and we should be more this because it's only a cartoon or it's only a picture, they shouldn't. They have no right. They have no place to say that to us, because they're not of the same faith as us. And I think by stopping any kind of
extremist
talkers or whatever coming to universities, I think we're going to have a completely wrong way of going about it. Because, like I say, it's going to drive it underground. And I'm sure there is. I'm not saying that there isn't people that don't say bad things. I'm sure there is people that have a funny, view of the faith, and they have their own, ideology or whatever you want to call it. But there's also a lot of good speakers as well. And one of the other points I'd just like to make before I go, I think Dr. Zakir Naik didn't say that he wasn't, that Bin Laden wasn't, a terrorist or an extremist. He said he's not my friend, so I can't say he was or he wasn't. So if you listen to his talk...
So he refused to acknowledge that Bin Laden was a terrorist?
No, I've seen that talk.
Well, you just said that.
He says neither am I saying he is or neither am I saying he isn't, because I don't know him personally. Until I see him carry out anything or do anything, this is
so the fact that on the record Bin Laden has justified the attack on 9/11 in interviews. I've interviewed people who have sat and interviewed Bin Laden.
A lot of people say to me...
So for a supposedly intelligent man, he'll just ignore that.
No,
that's not good enough, Rab. I'm sorry, that's not good enough.
A lot of people say to me...
I never met Hitler.
Nihal is what's it called?
Did you ever meet Adolf Hitler?
Nihal,
Rab?
It's Muslims. I'll say to him, no, I've spoken to Nihal many times.
Have you ever met Benito Mussolini? Have you ever met Vlad the Impaler? I haven't met any of these individuals, but I know them to be bad people because the evidence, the overwhelming evidence. So I'm sorry, Rab, wait a minute. Look, Rab, I'm sorry, but just to argue that Zakir Naik said, well, I didn't meet him, therefore I can't say anything. I mean, he's ridiculous. I mean, I didn't meet Joseph Mengele, right, the angel of death from Auschwitz, but you know what? I wouldn't want to. And I don't need to have met him to know that he was a thoroughly evil individual.
You believe everything in the media, Nihal. If you believe everything...
Well, do you know what? I pretty much believe that Adolf Hitler was a pretty bad person.
I'm not saying he wasn't. Well, once again...
No, I'm going to go on record. There you go. I'm going to stick my neck out and say Adolf Hitler was a bad person. There you go. And I didn't meet him. Shame Dr. Zakir Naik isn't brave enough to do the same thing about Bin Laden.
Not brave enough. I'm also of the same belief, right, which is what our religion teaches us, is until you actually physically, visually see something for yourself, do not make assumptions, because somebody could be lying.
Right, okay, so you don't watch television news then because you're just not there.
I don't believe anything.
Do you believe Assad, do you believe Bashar al-Assad is a bad person?
I don't know who Bashar al-Assad is, so I can't comment.
You don't know?
I don't know.
The president of Syria?
I don't know him personally, so I can't comment.
So you can't comment on whether Bashar al-Assad is a bad person?
I can't comment because
all right. Well, look, Rab, if I was you, I'd stay away from the news and newspapers and television news and all that, because unless you meet a bad person, how can you possibly form an opinion about them? Bizarre. Abid said, the professor says freedom of speech has its restrictions, but when people abuse Islam and insult our prophet, then they say this is freedom of speech. It's double standards like this which allows extremist nutjobs to reach an audience. Karamjeet in Leeds says, in my opinion, any extremist speaker should be banned from universities, and universities should not be able to hide behind freedom of speech and academic freedoms. But the problem here is what the British Western society sees as extremism. If people like the Muslim extremists are banned, then any other speaker who has extremist views should also be banned. Aftab said the only way one challenges ideas that someone considers a threat is to challenge it with alternative ideas. The very moment you try to prevent someone from saying something, it is to accept we do not have an idea that is better. How dangerous is that? If you do not equip people with the alternative ideas, you will always fail, because you cannot always successfully challenge people coming with dangerous ideas. Shakil has said, here are a few points. The professor's argument is narrow-minded and biased. He accused his rather quiet counterpart of not answering the question, but he didn't either. He makes very bold statements without backing them up. For anyone who believes his stance, they should really pick up on the points that I made. There is a strong argument that these so-called extremists need to be better educated. We also see that a lot of the extremists are in fact degree qualified. Surely university is a perfect place to have free speech and debate the ideas that are affecting the global community. Ranveer said, we never hear of places such as the Al-Mahdi Institute, Shia, which promotes interfaith understanding. Why do the extremists get all the limelight? Are others not invited? Or is it always he or she who shouts loudest who gets to dominate? Welcome to the phone-in show. Anonymous says, hi Nihal, totally agree with your caller, Professor Glees. I don't even know why you are having this debate. No speech or lecture regards to terrorism or any kind of violence definition should be allowed in any university. Nor are they. I mean, because that's falls foul of the law. The problem that the government has is it is trying to impose something on us which is non-violent extremism without defining what non-violent extremism actually sounds like. So we're all a bit confused. And I think there is a problem with Islamic culture as they are in the public eye every day. No, I don't know that. That's all. That's your suggestion. Tanvir on Facebook said, should people with extreme views be allowed to speak at universities? No. Yes, the government bill is a step in the right direction. Akash on Facebook says, whatever it takes to get these people to not influence the students, then by all means do whatever to keep the extremists away. Zahid on Facebook says, talking about free your mind when state wants to control it, like return to extremist 80s Tories, cutting back everything, even speech. All problems arisen out of 9/11. I'm a Muslim and not a terrorist. And Abdul on Facebook said they should never be allowed to speak the extreme views, whatever matter their religion or politics. Okay, just to be clear, you believe that a man or a woman who says the things about Jewish people that Professor Glees was quoting, some people believing, do you believe that person should be allowed to speak on a university campus?
They should be allowed to. Just because I don't agree with their views doesn't mean they shouldn't be allowed to.
Okay, all right. Professor Glees, you made that clear.
I'm just absolutely flabbergasted by this people like Imran, I'm afraid, are using the idea of academic freedom and free speech as a camouflage to make extremist political viewpoints seem normal. That's the problem.
What's extremist political viewpoints? Because people have a lot of political...
Wait. Professor Glees, that's an important question that Imran has asked you. What do you regard as an extreme political viewpoint and non-violent? Because, of course, if it's violent, then there are laws already existing. No, but a non-violent political extremist view...
With violent, I could name you endless people who have come onto campus to preach violence.
Which would be illegal.
Name me. Hang on. You can't name some names.
Well, that's not. There's no point in that.
I can't get my message over.
Yeah, sorry, Professor Glees. But tell me, non-violent, because of course laws are already there.
Yes, but hang on. We have just heard from Imran that he doesn't want the laws used because he says he doesn't want people who are extremists.
That's not what he said. He said that if they cross the line, then of course they will be arrested because they've broken the law.
Hang on. I'm challenging you to name me a single extremist campus ideologue who has been notified by the university authorities and prosecuted. And you can't do it because there isn't a single one. That's the truth.
That's right. There isn't a single one. There's not been a single preacher that hasn't been arrested for this sort of thing.
So, okay, wait a minute. Professor Glees, if the law is not being implemented, that's not the fault of universities, is it?
It is, because they have a duty. They have a duty to uphold the laws that we have in this country. There is no absolute right to free speech in this country, nor should there be, whether in a university or in anywhere else. And this has nothing to do with religion. Imran said, if it's his religious belief, etc., etc. The vast majority of British Muslims regard their religion rightly as a religion of peacefulness. They want to have nothing to do with it. Look at the parents of the girls from Bethnal Green.
As a view that is not welcome on a university campus, or would you think that, yes, it is welcome because we can challenge it? Imran Shah is a political blogger and joins me now. Good morning, Imran.
Good morning.
Do you think that extremist speakers should be banned from university campuses?
I don't, simply because we are dealing with a situation where in university, that's the best place where you can have these views and explore these views as a student. We have to understand that if we're going to create healthy adults, we have to allow a space where these growing adults can experience these views. Because if we are not going to allow a diverse mix of views in these areas, then we're not going to create a healthy society. That's simply the case.
All right, Imran, thank you. Professor Anthony Glees joins me now, Director of the Centre for Security and Intelligence Studies at the University of Buckingham. Good morning, Professor Glees.
Good morning.
Healthy adults need a space for debate with a diverse mixture of views, says Imran Shah. Therefore, these individuals should not be banned from university campuses.
Well, I agree with what you just said, but that is not actually what Imran was saying, and it's not the answer to the question you put to him. Because the question you put to him was about whether extremists and extremists who support violence or simply extremists. This has nothing to do with a healthy society. It actually has to do with the opposite of a healthy society. A healthy society is one in which people respect each other and they respect the values of liberal democracy. Indeed, it is on that basis that the British taxpayer agrees to fund higher education, that graduates will be civilised, democratic and inclusive. These are the government's words, not mine. Civilised, democratic and inclusive. And letting people onto campuses who say that women who commit adultery should be stoned, that Jews are descended from pigs, literally, that gays are unnatural and should suffer all kinds of punishment, including death. This has nothing to do with diversity. It has absolutely nothing to do with academic freedom. It is the antithesis of academic freedom. And yes, universities should jolly well rise to the challenge of this surge of jihadist ideology that's sweeping through young British Muslim minds and tell these people to go and get lost.
Imran Shah.
What the doctor is at.
Welcome to the phone-in show. Should people with extreme views be allowed to speak at universities? Recently, the government passed laws banning all extremist preachers from campuses. The bill says places such as schools and universities have a duty to help prevent people being drawn into terrorism. Do you think that that is the right approach? Will that drive those views underground? And what about free speech? So, do you think extremists should be allowed to come and talk to university students? After all, it's different from schools. Schools are there to teach children the difference between right and wrong, amongst other things. By the time you get to university, you're a young adult. Therefore, you should be allowed to discuss difficult and extreme views. Now, there are certain opinions, of course, that would already be covered under existing laws. But what exactly is an extremist view? You tell me. After the news with Anissa Kadri.
Got something to say? Then say it. Nihal on BBC Asian Network.
Anissa, thank you very much indeed. So, what do you think? Should people with extreme views be allowed to speak at universities, or should they be banned from speaking at universities? That's the question I've got for you this morning. What do you think? Your first question may well be, what is an extreme view? Well, the government guidelines say universities must take seriously their responsibility to exclude those promoting extremist views that support or are conducive to terrorism. So, free speech versus views that you do not like, and therefore those views should be banned from university campuses. Do you agree with that? The Home Secretary Theresa May certainly does. She expects universities to take a tough stand after claims that Mohammed Emwazi, the so-called jihadi John, may have been radicalised at Westminster University in London. So, by banning all extremist preachers, does that risk driving the debate further underground? After all, are you really going to be groomed in public in a meeting? Or is it more likely to happen on your tablet or on your phone or in your laptop in your bedroom? This is, after all, something that can be done online. You don't have to meet anyone to be led down a path of extremism. So what's the point? Or do you feel that, even though people who go to university are young adults, they are still impressionable? As we've seen, one of the three people who are currently on bail after visiting Syria was only 19 years old. Now, we're not aware at this point in time whether that person was a university student or not. We are certainly aware that Mohammed Emwazi did go to university. And while we may not be sure where and how he was radicalised, the university option is certainly there to explore. So, if these speakers are banned from universities, will that be a good thing? Or will that buy into the hands of the extremists themselves? Surely, in a mature democracy, we have to be able to handle lots of different views. So, tell me what you think. Should people with extreme views be allowed to speak at universities? 81869 is the text number. You can email Nihal at bbc.co.uk or give me a call. Here's the number.
Call Nihal now on 08459 440 445.
Good morning. It's coming up to 11 minutes past 10. You are, of course, listening to Nihal live on the BBC Asian Network, and a very good morning to you. The phone-in show is open for business, and I want to know, do you think that people with extreme views should be banned from university campuses? That's the question I have for you this morning, and I would be very, very interested to know what you think about this, whether you believe that there is no place for extremist views on university campuses, or whether you think, well, what about free speech? And does free speech only apply to non-Muslims? And when it comes to Muslims having their opinions, then there is an issue. And what is extremist ideology? Well, the Lib Dem climate change minister Ed Davey has tried to identify it. He said someone who espoused an Islamic caliphate, and then I'm quoting him here, and said in order to get that you'll need to kill people, would cross the line. He then went on to say, but saying some people believe in a caliphate, I don't think that's wrong. But then, of course, would you argue that you don't believe in the Arab Spring because people will die? And, of course, plenty of people died in the Arab Spring to set up the foundations of democracy in countries. Here, in this country, of course, blood was spilled in order for it to be a functioning democracy. Now, of course, we're not arguing that the caliphate is a democracy. It's, of course, completely the opposite of that. But do you think it would be extreme to say an Islamic caliphate, in order for it to be set up, some people will have to die? Some people will have to be killed in order to make sure that happened? Would you regard that?
What he's saying is essentially
Professor, yeah.
that the professor, whatever.
It doesn't matter.
What he's saying essentially is that the ideology that's espousing these ideas simply isn't the reason. It's simply not the reason where students are being radicalised. We've seen time and time again the source of radicalisation is the internet. It's not campus. And what he's...
Sorry, Imran, that's rather a broad statement, because you're essentially saying that everything, all radicalisation stems from the internet, and you don't have the proof to say that. It's very complex how people are radicalised. It's not just one thing, is it?
Well, no. But
Imran and Wazi may have been radicalised on campus. We just don't know.
No, but what I'm saying is that there is a continuous link that's being made between universities and campus and radicalisation, and there is simply no evidence base for this at all.
Neither is there any evidence to discount it wholly either, is there?
Well, no, I'm not saying that it's wholly on...
Well, that's what you did say.
But what I'm saying, this idea that we know the sources of radicalisation are completely false. The fact that we even think that it's from an Islamist ideology is false as well. Continuously we see the reasons why violent extremism is happening, and we see it from the mouth of those who are doing it.
Okay, yeah, but you're looking way back. But what we're thinking about is impressionable teenagers, 18, 19, for instance, who, if they are subjected to the kind of opinions that Professor Glees quoted about Jews and about homosexuals and about adulterers, then this cannot have a positive effect on them.
No, but what
deal with the specifics of what Professor Glees said.
Simply because it's not just Muslims who say this in our society. Therefore, at what level are we going to basically address the hypocrisy in which we deal with Muslims who say such things and other people?
Wait a minute. Hate speech is hate speech.
No, but if they are...
The laws are not... The law, as it is written, it does not say Muslims. It says people.
If we can prosecute them in the law, then prosecute them. Then why are we taking these extra steps in order to try and criminalise free speech, essentially? If someone is saying that my religious views is this, this and this, okay, fine. I may not agree with them, but he's still allowed to say it. If he's going to the extent that therefore that we must do this on other people, then that's the stage where it becomes hate speech and incitement to violence, and therefore there is already a legal precedence in order to deal with that sort of behaviour.
So Imran, do you believe...